Hey, quick question. How many of you have ever heard something on podcasts and thought, I gotta write that down, but only to miss it because pausing and rewinding is such a hassle? Don't worry, we've got you covered. Recently, I'm obsessed with this amazing app called Chatpods. Whenever a quote catches my ear, I just tap a button, and it'll instantly transcribe and save the moment for me to revisit later. It's how I listen to my favorite shows, and I'd love for you to try it with the Cloudcast. Just check the podcast description or search Chatpods in your app store. Chatpods. Chatpods. Capture podcast highlights anytime, anywhere.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. My name's Brian Gracely. I'm the host today, and wanted to welcome to you, first and foremost, welcome back to another Weekend Perspective. We are closing in on the end of November. This is the sort of last week before American Thanksgiving, which really is sort of the beginning of the end of the calendar year for a lot of people. We start to get into, the Thanksgiving week, which has a few days off. We start to get into sort of holiday season where everybody is trying to wrap up, trying to think about, what sort of family planning they're trying to do, as well as close up their work for the year. If you are, in some sort of role in which you've got to close out the quarter, you are frantically trying to close out the quarter. If you're not, you are trying to avoid anything that's going to pull you in to sort of screw up holiday end of year types of things. So we are into kind of the last 5 or 6 weeks of the year, I guess 5.5, 6 weeks of the year. And everybody, has either a mentality of just pure sort of craziness trying to close a quarter or trying to stay out of the limelight so that they can enjoy their holiday time with friends and family and just sort of some downtime. But hope everybody is doing well. I want to dive into something that we mentioned briefly on the last Cloud News of the Month. Brandon and I think Aaron was on, I can't remember. Anyways, I made a comment that, I hadn't really thought about, but we were talking about, AI as one of the topics we tend to get into with cloud and AI in this show. And we were kind of trying to figure out, to a certain extent, like, where are we from an AI perspective? And not in the sense of, the silly, like, oh, we're in the first inning or it's day one or any of those sort of things. But we were trying to figure out, have we as an industry, in general, have we figured out AI? Like, what's going on with it? Have we figured out, is it going to be as impactful as it could be? Is it going to be profitable? Who's going to win? Who's going to lose? All those sort of things, the kind of the normal intersection of the finances and economics of it, as well as the technology of it. And then, kind of doing the lame thing that we do from time to time, which is sort of, do the horse race thing and try and pick winners and losers. But one of the comments that I made, and I hadn't really thought about it while we were doing it, it just sort of popped up, and I've been thinking about it more and more, is, I asked Brandon, I said, hey, who is the Netflix of this new sort of AI era, this AI generation? And what I meant by that was not, who's like the streaming video company, not who's the company that's sort of going to disrupt, a significant part of the industry, although that would be a very interesting question. I was asking it more in the context for those of us that were around in the earlier days of cloud. And Netflix, while the company was doing interesting things, moving from DVDs to streaming and what that meant, and people were excited about it, the stock price was going up. There was also a technology part of Netflix that we were all fascinated with. And there was a gentleman named Adrian Cockcroft who has since left Netflix, got into sort of the VC business, and does a whole bunch of consulting. And I'm not sure if he's not fully retired at this point. But Adrian was sort of the face of the technology behind Netflix, and was very prominent and visible with the launch of AWS. Not necessarily coordinated, but kind of became very visible with that. He was doing lots and lots of talks. And the reason I bring this up was Netflix at the time, for those of us that were in the cloud space and were in this, space of sort of new technology, was to a certain extent the canary in the coal mine in terms of being very visible, being very publicly visible, that they were all in on this new way of doing stuff. And, part of it was, for legitimate reasons, their business was moving very quickly. They needed technology that would scale very quickly. They never knew on any given day if a new release was going to be incredibly, popular, how much it would need to scale. And so there was all sorts of sort of new things they were doing with this technology And it, it kind of grabbed the interest of the people in the technology sector. We were all sort of fascinated with a couple of things. We were, there was sort of a face for this newness, right? So, a face or at least a name that people could recognize. Maybe not necessarily Adrian, but Netflix. Everybody sort of knew what Netflix was, and it lended a gravitas to the idea that, hey, this thing, is something new. And because Netflix was sort of disrupting with their business model, it also became a very interesting way of comparing kind of new and old. Of look, here's this company that's tried to do new things, and under the covers, they're trying to do new stuff with technology, and it kind of became the face of, hey, if you're trying to do quote unquote digital transformation, if you're trying to do this new stuff for your industry, and again, that could mean all sorts of stuff. It could have meant, you were John Deere tractors and you were trying to put, tracking technology into your equipment. You were trying to, sort of digitize something that was physical before, or, you were doing something new in banking, whatever it might be. It gave us kind of, a real, realization factor to it, right? It started to sort of validate that a new model could not only be disruptive, but also be successful in the market, be profitable, and so forth. And that was, very interesting to people. And again, there was always a little bit of backlash of people going, hey, you're a bank, you're not a streaming media company. Hey, you're a bank, you're not, this, sort of new technology entity. You make pharmaceuticals or you make automobiles. But it did give people a sense of like, okay, disruption can be more than just disruptive. It can be positive. It can be profitable. It can be, what seemed like a way to sort of make change within companies. And again, if you looked at Netflix was, kind of a weird company to begin with, in that it didn't really make anything. It just simply was shipping out DVDs. It really was sort of this sort of mail. It was a company that did nothing more than just sort of deal with the logistics supply chain of things in the mail, right? And so to move from something that was very physically based, physical media, physical distribution, to something that became completely digitized was fascinating to a lot of people. Anyways, so if you went back again a decade, maybe a little bit more than that, it was sort of the poster child of that, right? It encouraged people to explore older bad practices, right? Like we could talk about, hey, why are we doing things this way? Why are we thinking about design a certain way? Why are we thinking about failure scenarios a certain way? Why are we organizing our companies a certain way if the goal is, to move faster, deal with more frequent breakage that people don't necessarily recognize as breaking, all those sort of things. They were the poster child for us having these discussions out in the public. And then the last piece that was really interesting was they forced us to begin to define metrics of what this new world could look like, right? And whether it was how many times we could update a system in a day, or thinking about availability. Did 5 nines really still matter anymore? What was the cost of delivering something? We just got into sort of talking about metrics in a different way, and again, not necessarily adopting the old way of doing things, but looking at what was now relevant, to this new world, right? So Netflix was a very much played an important role, whether they wanted to or not, in a whole sort of generation of people looking at these new technologies, both at the technologist perspective, but also at the business perspective, and saying, there's possibility with this stuff, right? This can be viable things. It's not just disruptive, but it has, look at what's possible, right? And so I'd throw out this sort of comment to Brandon, as I said, we're in the early days of AI, and again, none of us really know. There's all sorts of obviously prognostications that AI is going to do amazing things and it's going to change the world in every way possible, and all gigantic things. But at the same time, we don't necessarily have kind of a poster child for that, right? I mean, we're right now sort of just fascinated with how much money is flowing into it. We're fascinated with certain technological things that have broken through the size of a model, or maybe how easy it is to ask the system through something like a chat GPT, how do I do this thing? But we don't really yet have anything more than those things, right? We don't really have a view of the marketplace, the end of the users of this stuff. And that was kind of what I was searching for, right? So I think the purpose of this, weekend perspective that I'm talking about is I'm curious, and I kind of want to explore maybe why we don't necessarily have that yet. And, again, we are in very early days, right? If we define sort of the generative AI era, right? This is the weird part about AI. AI has been around for multiple decades, but we sort of now only think of it in terms of Gen AI. And so if we're really just thinking about that, this really goes back to, the first time ChatGPT kind of got found, that was the first mainstream type of thing. It's really still only 2 years old, right? And so, if we think about that, we do get into sort of some interesting thinking of, it's still really, really new. Are we wasting our time looking for a Netflix, right? Do we just need to let this thing evolve and so forth? And I think to a certain extent, yes, that's true and valid, right? Like you can't necessarily rush some things and things take time and all that sort of stuff. But I do think at the same time, when we're talking about something that is going to be supposed to be so impactful to so many people, to societies, to economies, to, industries, new and old and so forth, it is sometimes useful to have kind of a lighthouse, have some sort of something to point to. And I guess my whole point in this is I'm a little bit surprised that one hasn't emerged yet, right? Now, like I said, we've seen some interesting demonstrations of things like new OpenAI models, and we've seen everybody include it in their keynote. But I would sort of argue, I don't think we yet have a Netflix. And so I started writing down some things of like, why do we need a Netflix of the AI era, right? And I think part of it is because as much as people can get excited about new things, the vast majority of people aren't necessarily leaders, right? They tend to follow because it is really hard to lead. It's hard to see so far into the future and be willing to take the risks that what the future could be or failure that could come with that. That most people tend to sort of go, I'm going to lay back a little bit. I'll be a little more conservative and I'm going to let things play out. And people could argue, well, that's not really true. Look at how much money's flowing in. Look how many startups there are. Yeah. But when we really focus on the users of the technology, the buyers of the technology, the implementers of, turning it into something for the healthcare industry or the automotive industry or for, government or for, whatever, gaming or whatever it might be. But again, those still feel like they're kind of missing. And so I sort of made a list. It's a short list, but a list of questions that I've been sort of thinking about in terms of, why do we need this, or what might be holding us back from actually doing this? And so the first thing on my list is there is a perspective out there, right? And I've joked about it on the show, and I've tried to be serious about it on the show. Is there is a perspective that AI can apparently do everything, right? It's going to extend our lives. It's going to find new cures for things. It's going to, make sort of everything better. Okay, cool, maybe. But what are some of those specific things? And I think we're still, at the most highest level, I think we throw out these things and then we go, well, show me something. And the thing is a chatbot, or the thing is an automator of writing software. And I think everything tends to sort of fall into those categories. And maybe it's not exactly a chatbot. Maybe you've got a mechanism that, summarizes documents or something along those lines. But we really still haven't gotten to a point yet where people can articulate more than a couple of those types of use cases, or at least they always sort of fall into those sort of buckets. And so I think to a certain extent, and maybe those are going to be the main buckets. But we haven't yet figured out a way to articulate, well, what's the variation in those buckets? What's the evolution of those buckets? And I think, we'll see that sort of evolve, and things like agents and other stuff will make that happen. But we haven't yet really been able to articulate how these generative AI breakthroughs are going to be materialized, right? We kick them around. I'm not disputing that they're going to happen, but we just haven't figured out how to explain those or how to even demonstrate them, right? So that's the first thing that's sort of on my list. Is I think there's a certain thing of getting beyond chatbots, getting beyond code assistance, and sort of hoping for the whatever implementation of agents, but like the visibility. If you were to point to something, it's harder today to necessarily point to some of those things, and that's fine. Again, early days, people are experimenting. I think the second thing that we haven't quite figured out how to do with from an AI perspective is we haven't really thought about the new ways of thinking about old problems, right? Or even just saying, this is an old problem. Let's stop thinking about it that way. Now with AI, I can think about it this way, right? So, kind of a perfect example of that is we think about, people will talk all the time about, using, AI as an assistant for call centers. And, for the most part, we sort of then put it in the paradigm of being like, well, the experience will still be, person will somehow connect to you with the problem. They will still try and describe the problem to them in some thing that seems right for them. And then the system will try and figure that out, right? But that paradigm is exactly the same paradigm as, I called the call center. Yes, I didn't have to wait necessarily because maybe there's infinite number of agents now, but we still sort of struggle through this thing of like, you're just trying to interpret a problem I have, and then you're sort of filtering me through the same sort of rules that you have. You haven't really changed the experience yet. Yes, you've potentially changed the cost on the back end of delivering this, but you haven't really changed the experience of it in the same way that like Netflix changed the experience of being like, I'm going to wait 3 days. I'm going to get 3 movies. I don't know if I'll like them or not. And, then, what would I do for a series? Like they created the concept of like series, so that series would just sort of run through. You didn't have to wait till next Tuesday for the next thing to come out. So I don't know that we've really seen that yet. Yes, we've seen ChatGPT be able to tell me, hey, summarize 600 pages of PDFs, but it didn't, hasn't really changed the paradigm. It just sort of accelerated the paradigm. So I still think, we haven't quite scratched the surface on thinking about new ways of solving old problems. The third thing, and this one jumped out at me, I was listening to a podcast called Software Defined Interviews, Michael Cote and I forget he's got a co-host on there. I apologize. Anyway, it's called Software Defined Interviews, and they were talking to a woman named Rachel Stevens, who is a analyst over at RedMonk. So for those of you, we've talked about RedMonk on the show. Very good analyst firm that looks at mostly developers and implementers and so forth. But anyway, she made an interesting comment as they were talking about AI, and she was sort of exploring her interest in it. And she said, I've found some things that have helped me. So at an individual level, she's like, we have found some things. And they're a smaller company. I think maybe a dozen people or something along those lines. But she's like, we haven't yet figured out how to share the things that they've done at an individual level at a team level. And this isn't a knock on them. I think what she was stating is something that we've sort of heard from a lot of people is like, we haven't yet cracked the code on how do we make AI more than just sort of an individual level making things better, right? There haven't been the sort of canonical use cases or the canonical examples of, this is a team function and the team function has gotten better. I think we've started to see the beginning of there are a team of 50 people and individually they've sort of gotten better. And that, if you sort of go, well, if the sum of the parts is going to be bigger than the whole, then, or something along those lines, that might be fine. That might be the way we do that. But I feel like we haven't yet sort of cracked the code of like, what's a team activity that the team collectively will operate better than they did as just individuals with better tools, with better saws and better hammers and things like that. So I think there is still, a lot of opportunity there. And again, I'm going off of anecdotal data of like people that I talk to. Like we hear a lot of like, I do this with this tool and that makes me somewhat better, but I haven't necessarily, we haven't implemented that at a team level yet or something along those lines. So I think there's that breakthrough to still happen. Another thing I've been kicking around the idea of is I think we haven't yet figured out how to normalize or I don't know what the right word is here, kind of make consistent. It doesn't have to be consistent, but like, what's the starting point? So if somebody says like, hey, I've heard that AI can do amazing things and we'd like to get started doing that with my business. I think if you went to, 20 of the same 20 companies in the same industry, they wouldn't sort of all have the same starting point, right? And so I do feel like there is an opportunity to create sort of the couch to 5K analogy, right? So the analogy is oftentimes people talk about like, hey, how do I get healthier? And people will say, well, you should need to exercise and so on and so forth. And people are motivated by goals. And so there's this concept, floats around on the internet. You can find it. But if you look up Couch to 5K, it's basically like, how do I get from somebody who is not regularly doing active activities to doing something that has a meaningful path to something that can become a goal and something that can be done in a reasonable amount of time. So the concept is Couch to 5K. So how do I get myself off the couch into something that's more active to a 5K race, which is a 3-mile, walk or run or whatever it might be. And they've done a really good job of being like, oh, okay, I'm not going to make this seem impossible. I'm not going to make it seem so big that anybody can kind of do this. And I do feel like we need a bunch of templates, a bunch of starting points for sort of what I'll sort of call like Couch to 5K or Couch to First AI or something along those lines. So, I think that's something that would be really interesting to see. I would love to hear from any of you. Shoot us a note at show@thecloudcast.net. What have been your starting points for AI, right? What have been your starting points from both an individual perspective, but also within your company? You don't have to give away whatever your internal secrets are, but like, what are the types of things that your company has gotten started with, right? What are the projects that you got started with, and why did you start with those, right? And are those proving to be good starting points? Are they proving to be too big? Are they proving to be great ideas for starting points, but the technology's not there yet? I'd sort of love to sort of hear what was the first step that you took. Maybe I don't necessarily need the success. I know this whole show is about like what is the success, what's the Netflix, but like I'm curious what your first step would be. So yeah, if you get a chance, either hit us up on one of the social media platforms, Blue Sky, X, any of those things. We're at Cloudcast Pod. You can find us that way. Or just, again, shoot us an email, show@thecloudcast.net. Would love to hear that. And the last thing I kind of had on my list was, and this sort of goes to the, sort of Couch to 5K concept. And I wonder about this, and we had the same sort of thing happen with cloud. And there are tons and tons of parallels between the early days of cloud and the early days of AI. I do wonder if, given how much is talked about AI as being this unbelievable change agent, unbelievable mechanism of disruption, but also change, positive, maybe negative, how much money is flowing into the system, that the people that are tasked with figuring this out. And again, when I say tasked with figuring this out, like, I don't just mean technologists, I mean, business leaders who are like, sitting there thinking like, could AI help us in this way? I do have a sense that there's a certain perspective out there that if you're not thinking about it in a really big bang way, you may go, well, that may not be worth our time. Or like, maybe set in a different way, you're almost embarrassed that you would think about something small instead of thinking about something huge. And there's some psychological reasons for this, obviously, because it can be perceived that AI can do such amazing things. And there's a reason, maybe there's a reason, who knows, why VCs are pouring so much money into this and so forth, that if you're thinking small, you might embarrass yourself. And so I'm really kind of also curious, maybe not in that first step, but in the thinking that people have is like, are people thinking in terms of just really big bang? And I say that because I think the thing we learned from the cloud era was there were people who thought in terms of cloud as big bang, like we are going to shut down our data centers next month and we're going to move every one of our applications to the cloud. And because AWS told us that everything will be cheaper, that things are just going to be more awesome, right? And we saw some ramifications of that and some success and some failure and so forth. But what we also saw, the success of many of the companies who leveraged the cloud, or at least leveraged cloud thinking and cloud technology, was they actually started thinking about a whole bunch of smaller projects in modular ways that could be reused, right? That could, once you start connecting them together, there was both a faster learning curve in smaller modular types of things, but also collectively you started realizing, oh, we solved this problem over here. I could reuse that in 4 other ways. And so I am also very curious, and I have a feeling that there is a certain perspective that everything in AI needs to be fairly big bang. And I think the reality, if it continues to sort of follow the patterns we saw back with cloud days that we feel like we're starting to see with the AI days is that smaller, more modular ways of thinking about the projects are going to be both more beneficial in terms of utilizing the technology that's available today, doing it in a way that's cost effective, but also increasing your learning curve and making it reusable to continue to accelerate learning curves going into the future. So anyways, I kind of drifted off the Netflix stuff, but I do feel like if I bring it back to sort of one central point, we still don't necessarily have a Netflix of the AI era yet. Maybe they're coming around the corner. Maybe they'll pop up at reInvent this year. Who knows? But I also feel like we're not necessarily yet remembering or relearning the same sort of lessons we went through from the early cloud days. And maybe it'd be useful for me to do why I think there are so many parallels between the early cloud days and the early AI days. Maybe that'll be next week's show or something like that. But anyways, would love to hear your feedback on this stuff. Would love to sort of hear what people are doing successfully and even unsuccessfully. Again, hit us up, shoot us a note, show@thecloudcast.net. So anyways, with that, we will have a show out after the Thanksgiving break. Hopefully this one will help you a little bit. Maybe if you're, maybe save it if the Thanksgiving break gets long. But anyways, we'll have a show next Sunday as well. We'll have one out this Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving as well. So we are cranking out with that. Anyways, hope everybody has a good holiday. If it's a holiday near where you're at, wherever you are around the globe, hopefully you get a chance to spend some time with your family. Hopefully the end of Q4 is not too chaotic for any of you. But anyways, hope you're doing well. Thanks for listening to the show. Thanks for telling a friend about the show. Thanks for helping us continue to grow the community. And again, we always love when people are shooting us emails about topics they would love to hear about. We do have a whole set of the end of year stuff coming up. So as soon as we get past sort of Thanksgiving and into early December, we will start cranking those out. I know those are usually some of the most listened to and favorite shows of the year. So anyways, with that, I'll wrap it up. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.